Nobody falls asleep on a park bench unless life has taken them somewhere they never planned to go. I remember the exact moment I saw her. Manhattan was wrapped in cold November air. The city glittered with 1,000 lights, but the warmth never seemed to reach the streets. It was nearly midnight when my driver turned into a quiet avenue bordering a small public park. Most people were already home. The benches sat empty beneath pools of yellow light cast by old street lamps. At least I thought they were empty. Then I saw her. A young woman slept alone on the farthest bench beneath a tree that had already surrendered most of its leaves to autumn. A small suitcase rested beside her. Not a shopping cart. Not piles of belongings. Just one worn suitcase. Everything she owned appeared to fit inside it. The sight made no sense. She did not look homeless. Even from the car I could tell that. Her coat was old but clean. Her shoes were scuffed but carefully maintained. One hand rested on the suitcase handle even while she slept, as though she was afraid it might disappear. The traffic light ahead turned red. My car stopped. For reasons I still cannot explain, I kept looking. Most people sleep differently when they feel safe. She did not. Her shoulders remained tense. Her posture seemed prepared to wake at any moment. It looked less like sleep and more like exhaustion finally winning a battle. "Everything okay, sir?" my driver asked. I did not answer immediately. Across the street, the young woman shifted slightly beneath the cold wind. Her hair moved across her face. She pulled her coat tighter around herself without fully waking. Something about the image stayed with me. I had spent my entire life studying people. It was part of surviving, part of succeeding. Most individuals reveal more about themselves in quiet moments than they ever do in conversation. The woman on that bench was telling a story without speaking a single word. A story about pride, about struggle, about someone doing everything possible to hold herself together. The light turned green. My driver started forward. "Wait." The word left my mouth before I had time to think. The car stopped again. Looked through the window one last time. The park remained silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Nobody seemed to notice her. Hundreds of people had probably walked past that bench throughout the evening. Few had looked twice. That realization bothered me more than it should have. Eventually we drove away. Yet the image followed me through the rest of the night. It followed me into meetings the next morning. It followed me during lunch. It followed me while I reviewed reports in my office overlooking the city. A stranger sleeping on a bench should not have occupied so much space in my thoughts. But she did. Late the following evening, I found myself taking the same route home. I told myself it was coincidence. Deep down I knew better. The park appeared again outside the window. The same trees. The same benches. The same cold wind moving through the darkness. And there she was, sleeping on the same bench, holding the same suitcase. Alone. My name is Vincent Romano. I had spent years believing that power allowed a man to understand the world. Yet as I stared at that young woman resting beneath a street lamp, I realized there was something far more difficult to understand. How someone could lose so much and still hold on to their dignity. And for the first time in a very long time, I wanted to know her story. Some faces leave an impression. Others refuse to leave your mind. For the next 3 days, I told myself I would forget about the woman from the park. Manhattan was full of people carrying stories I would never hear. One stranger should not have mattered. Yet every time I thought about that cold bench beneath the street lamp, I found myself wondering if she had slept there again. The question lingered longer than it should have. On the fourth evening, curiosity won. My driver was halfway across town when I asked him to change routes. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror but wisely chose not to ask questions. 20 minutes later, we passed the park once more. My eyes immediately searched the darkness. The bench was empty. For reasons I could not explain, disappointment settled in my chest. Maybe she had found somewhere warmer. Maybe she had moved on. Maybe the difficult chapter in her life had already ended. The possibilities should have reassured me. Instead, they left me oddly restless. Then I noticed movement near the entrance of the park. A woman emerged carrying the same worn suitcase. It was her. She was not preparing to sleep. She was leaving. The sight surprised me. The previous nights had frozen her in my mind as someone trapped by circumstances. Yet now she walked with purpose. Her shoulders remained straight. Her pace remained steady. Whatever challenges she faced, she refused to surrender to them. I watched her disappear into the evening crowd. The next afternoon, fate intervened again. I was leaving a meeting near Midtown when I spotted her through the window of a small cafe. She sat alone at a corner table. A laptop rested in front of her. Several printed resumes were spread across the surface beside an untouched cup of coffee. She was working, searching, trying. The realization changed everything. She was not hiding from life. She was fighting to reclaim it. For nearly an hour, I remained inside my car watching people enter and leave the cafe. She never looked up. Her attention remained fixed on applications, emails, and notes scribbled across a yellow legal pad. Occasionally she rubbed her eyes before continuing. Determination radiated from every movement. Eventually she packed everything into her suitcase and left. A suitcase. Not a handbag. Not a backpack. The same suitcase from the park. That detail stayed with me. The following morning I saw her again. This time outside a public library. She spent nearly 2 hours inside before emerging carrying several books and folders. Later that day, I noticed her at another coffee shop, then a temporary employment office, then a grocery store where she carefully counted cash before paying. The pattern became clear. She was building a schedule around survival. Every dollar mattered. Every opportunity mattered. Every hour mattered. Yet despite everything, she carried herself with remarkable dignity. She did not ask strangers for help. She did not seek sympathy. She simply kept moving forward. One rainy evening I watched from across the street as she entered a laundromat carrying the suitcase and a small duffel bag. She sat beside the machines reading one of her library books while waiting. Most people would have looked defeated. She looked focused. That was when I understood what fascinated me. It was not her struggle. It was her refusal to let the struggle define her. My name is Vincent Romano. I had spent years surrounded by people who measured success by what they possessed. Yet the woman from the park bench possessed almost nothing. And somehow she carried herself with more grace than many people who had everything. The more I saw her, the more one question followed me. Who was she before life pushed her onto that bench beneath the street lamp? The truth is, people rarely look the way you expect them to look when they are struggling. By then nearly 2 weeks had passed since I first saw the woman sleeping in the park. I still did not know her name. Yet I had learned enough to know one thing. Every assumption I made about her had been wrong. I thought she was defeated. She was determined. I thought she had given up. She was working harder than most people I knew. I thought she was simply surviving. The reality was far more complicated. One chilly afternoon I found myself entering a small public library, a few blocks from Bryant Park. I had no reason to be there. At least none that I was willing to admit. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air. Quiet conversations drifted between the shelves. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. And there she was, sitting alone at a long table near the back. Her suitcase rested beside her chair. Several books were spread across the table. A notebook filled with handwritten notes sat open in front of her. She looked focused, professional, organized. Nothing about her suggested someone who had recently been sleeping on a park bench. For nearly an hour she worked without distraction. Occasionally she highlighted passages in a textbook. Sometimes she typed on her laptop. Other times she reviewed printed documents. The more I watched, the more curious I became. Eventually, she stood and walked toward the reference desk. That was when I noticed something I had not seen before. She wore a visitor badge clipped to her coat. Beneath her name was a logo, a healthcare company. The discovery surprised me. She had a professional background. Suddenly the pieces began fitting together. Later that afternoon, I followed a coincidence that revealed even more. As she exited the library, several papers slipped from a folder she was carrying. A middle-aged woman nearby helped gather them. During their brief conversation, I overheard enough to understand the situation. The woman addressed her by name. Emily. Emily Carter. The name stayed with me. More importantly, I heard the other woman mention a former office, a corporate restructuring, layoffs. Suddenly everything made sense. Emily had not spent years living on the edge. She had fallen unexpectedly, like thousands of hard-working people do every year. one difficult event, one chain reaction, one season of bad luck. The following days confirmed the pattern. Emily had once worked in healthcare administration, a stable career, a predictable future. Then the company downsized. Her position disappeared. Savings vanished faster than expected. Temporary housing ended. The suitcase arrived. The park bench followed. Yet even after learning those details, what impressed me most was what she had not lost. Her self-respect remained intact. One evening, I watched her help an elderly man carry groceries up the steps of an apartment building. Another day, she returned a wallet someone had accidentally left behind in a coffee shop. She still found ways to help other people despite everything happening in her own life. That detail stayed with me longer than anything else. Most people become bitter when life treats them unfairly. Emily had become resilient instead. A week later, I saw her sitting on a bench outside the library reading while the afternoon sun settled across the city. For the first time she looked peaceful. Not happy exactly. Just calm. As though she had accepted that tomorrow would be difficult and decided to face it anyway. I remained across the street watching quietly. Then something unexpected happened. Emily looked up from her book and smiled at a stranger walking past with a small child. The child smiled back. It lasted only a second, yet somehow it revealed everything. Life had taken away her job, her apartment, her stability, but it had not taken away her kindness. And as I watched her close the book and continue toward another uncertain evening, I realized I no longer wanted to know what had happened to her. I wanted to know what happened next. Every person carries a moment when life changes direction. The difference is that some people see it coming and others do not. Emily Carter belonged to the second group. By then, I knew enough pieces of her story to understand how she had ended up carrying a suitcase through Manhattan. But knowing the facts and understanding the costs were two different things. One cold afternoon, I saw her sitting alone in a quiet corner of the public library. Rain tapped softly against the windows while she stared at an open notebook. For the first time since I had noticed her, she looked defeated. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Just tired in a way that reached deeper than physical exhaustion. She closed her eyes for a moment and pressed her fingers against her temples before returning to another job application. The sight stayed with me. Later that evening, I learned more than I expected. Emily met an older woman at a small diner near the train station. I happened to be there for an unrelated meeting. The woman turned out to be a former coworker. Their conversation drifted across the nearly empty restaurant. Not enough for me to hear every word, but enough to reveal the truth hidden beneath the surface. Emily had not only lost her position during a company restructuring. Around the same time, her mother became seriously ill in another state. Medical expenses arrived. Travel costs followed. Savings disappeared. Then temporary housing ended sooner than expected. One problem became three. Three became 10. Life can unravel surprisingly fast when enough difficult things happen at once. What struck me most was not what Emily said. It was what she refused to say. She never blamed anyone. She never complained about unfairness. She never described herself as a victim. Instead, she spoke about responsibilities, about obligations, about doing what needed to be done. The woman across from her eventually reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Emily smiled politely, but I could see the strain behind it. The kind of strain people carry when they spend too long pretending everything will be fine. Over the following week, the picture became clearer. Emily traveled regularly to visit her mother whenever she could afford the train fare. She spent hours searching for work between those trips. She stretched every dollar carefully. Some nights she found temporary shelter. Other nights she returned to the park. Through it all, she maintained the same quiet dignity that first caught my attention. One evening I watched her purchase a small cup of soup from a food cart. Before taking a single bite, she noticed an elderly man sitting nearby without a meal. A few moments later, she handed him the soup and walked away with nothing. I sat motionless inside my car. The gesture made no sense. She needed that food. She needed every dollar. Yet she gave anyway. Most people become protective of what little remains when life becomes difficult. Emily remained generous. That realization changed something inside me. Until then, she had been a mystery. A story I wanted to understand. Now she became something else. Someone I respected. Someone I admired. A few days later, I saw her standing outside a building after another unsuccessful interview. Snowflakes drifted through the evening air. She checked her phone, read a message and lowered her eyes. Even from a distance, disappointment was visible. Yet seconds later, she straightened her shoulders and started walking again. Forward. Always forward. Watching her disappear into the crowd, I finally understood what life had not managed to take from Emily Carter. It had taken her job, her apartment, her security, but it had not taken her courage. And for reasons I still could not fully explain, I found myself wanting to protect the one thing she had left. The first real conversation rarely happens when you expect it. After weeks of watching Emily from a distance, I had convinced myself that knowing her story was enough. It was not. Curiosity had slowly become concern. Concern had become admiration. And admiration was becoming something far more dangerous. It happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Snow drifted lazily through the city while pedestrians hurried beneath coats and umbrellas. I was leaving a meeting when I noticed Emily sitting alone inside a small cafe near the public library. Her suitcase rested beside the table as usual. A laptop sat open in front of her. Several printed resumes were spread across the surface. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's eyes after too many disappointments arrive in a row. Before I could change my mind, I stepped inside. Warm air greeted me. The smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the room. Emily did not notice me immediately. She was focused on an email displayed on her screen. Whatever she read caused her shoulders to sink slightly. Another rejection, I guessed. For a moment I almost walked away. Then she looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face. We had seen each other several times without ever speaking. The city has a strange way of making familiar strangers. Is this seat taken? I asked. Emily glanced at the empty chair across from her and smiled politely. No. I sat down. The conversation that followed felt surprisingly natural. There were no dramatic introductions. No remarkable coincidence. Just two people sharing a table while snow fell outside. I see you here often, she said after a few minutes. I laughed softly. I was about to say the same thing. A faint smile appeared. It was the first time I had seen her relax. We talked about simple things at first. Coffee, weather, books, the city. Emily spoke intelligently and thoughtfully. She asked questions instead of talking about herself. She listened carefully before answering. The more we talked, the more difficult it became to connect this woman with the image of someone sleeping alone in a park. Eventually, our conversation drifted toward work. Emily hesitated before explaining that she was searching for new opportunities. She shared only the surface details. A lost position. A difficult year. Unexpected challenges. Nothing more. Yet even then she avoided self-pity. Life changes quickly sometimes, she said. Faster than we expect. I nodded. That is true. The important thing is to keep moving. There was conviction behind the words. Not because she fully believed them every day, but because she had no other choice. That honesty impressed me more than confidence ever could. We remained there for nearly an hour. Time seemed to disappear. For the first time since noticing her, I was not observing Emily's life from a distance. I was experiencing it beside her. When she laughed, the sound felt genuine. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. Beneath the worry and uncertainty, there was still warmth. There was still hope. Eventually she glanced at the clock and sighed. I should go. Her suitcase stood beside the table waiting for her. A painful reminder of everything she carried. Yet she rose with the same dignity I had admired from the beginning. As we stepped outside together, cold air swept through the street. Snowflakes drifted around us beneath the glow of traffic lights. Emily smiled before adjusting the strap of her bag. It was nice talking to you. Likewise. Then she started walking toward another uncertain evening. I remained where I was, watching her disappear into the crowd. For weeks, Emily Carter had been a mystery. Now she was a person. A real person with dreams, fears, responsibilities, and remarkable strength. And as the snowfall continued around me, I realized something I had been avoiding for far too long. I was no longer interested in helping a stranger. I was beginning to care about her. Some people would rather endure hardship than accept help they have not earned. Emily Carter was one of those people. After our first conversation, seeing her became part of my routine. Sometimes we met in the cafe near the library. Sometimes our paths crossed outside train stations or along crowded sidewalks. The conversations were never planned. Yet each one seemed to arrive exactly when I needed it. We talked about books, about the city, about places we wanted to visit someday. Emily rarely discussed her own problems unless directly asked. Even then, she revealed only enough to answer the question. The rest remained carefully guarded. That only made me respect her more. One snowy evening, we found ourselves sitting across from each other in the same cafe where we first spoke. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath streetlights and falling snow. Inside, the room felt warm and quiet. Emily wrapped both hands around a cup of tea while staring thoughtfully through the window. She looked tired again. The kind of tired that appears after carrying too much for too long. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She smiled slightly. "You just did." I laughed. "Fair point." The smile lingered for a moment before fading. "Go ahead." I hesitated. For weeks, I had watched her fight through circumstances that would have broken many people. Every instinct told me to help. Every conversation told me she would resist it. "Have you found anything yet?" I asked. Emily understood immediately. Employment, housing, stability, the things she spent every day searching for. She lowered her eyes toward the tea. "Not yet." The answer sounded calm. Too calm. "But I will." "How can you be so sure?" A faint smile returned. "Because the alternative is giving up." There was no self-pity in her voice. Only determination. The answer stayed with me long after she spoke. Several days later, an opportunity appeared. One of my companies needed administrative support for a new healthcare initiative. The position aligned perfectly with Emily's experience. Good salary, benefits, stability. For the first time, I saw a direct path toward changing her situation. The following afternoon, I met her for coffee. The opening arrived naturally. We were discussing work when I mentioned the opportunity. "You would be perfect for it," I said. Emily listened carefully while I described the role. For a brief moment, hope flickered across her face. Then it disappeared. "Thank you," she said softly. "But no." I blinked. "No." She nodded. "I appreciate the offer." Her voice remained kind but firm. "More than you know." "Then why?" Emily stared at the table for several seconds before answering. "Because you are offering it because of me." I frowned. "That is usually how jobs work." She laughed quietly. "You know what I mean." The truth was I did. Emily took a slow breath. "I cannot accept something simply because someone feels sorry for me." The words landed harder than she realized. Sorry. That was the last thing I felt. Admiration, respect, concern, never pity. "I do not feel sorry for you," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Maybe not." Her eyes softened. "But I still need to do this myself." There it was. The thing life had failed to break. Her pride. Not arrogance. Not stubbornness. Pride in the purest sense. The belief that she could still stand on her own feet. Even after everything. We left the cafe an hour later. Snow continued falling across the city. Emily adjusted the strap of her bag and smiled before heading toward the subway station. I watched her disappear into the crowd. Most people would have viewed her refusal as a mistake. I saw it differently. Emily had lost almost everything. Yet she was still fighting for the right to rebuild her life herself. And as I stood there beneath the falling snow, I realized I would have to find another way to help her. One she would never see coming. The best help is often the kind that arrives without asking for recognition. After Emily refused the position, I stopped trying to help her directly. She had made herself clear. What she needed was an opportunity, not a rescue. Respecting that difference mattered. For the next several weeks, I continued living my life while quietly opening doors she would never know existed. It began with a phone call, then another, then a conversation over lunch with someone who owed me a favor. Nothing dramatic, nothing dishonest, just introductions, connections, possibilities. The kind of opportunities people create for each other every day. The difference was that Emily never saw my hand in any of it. One morning, she called me unexpectedly. The sound of her voice immediately told me something had changed. "You sound different," I said. A laugh escaped her. A real laugh. The kind I had not heard in weeks. "I had an interview." "That is great." "Actually, I had 3. I smiled despite myself. "Busy day. Busy week." There was excitement in her voice now. Hope. Something life had been slowly trying to take from her for months. We met later that evening at the cafe near the library. Emily arrived carrying the same suitcase, but somehow it looked lighter. Perhaps because she no longer seemed to be carrying the weight of the entire world along with it. She told me about the interviews. A healthcare nonprofit. A medical administration group. Community outreach organization. Every opportunity matched her experience almost perfectly. Better than anything she had found before. "It feels strange," she admitted while stirring her tea. "For months nothing happened. And now everything is happening at once." I listened quietly. The truth sat between us, invisible and silent. Emily believed luck had finally changed. I intended to keep it that way. Days turned into another week. Then another. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the city. Snow became rain. Gray skies occasionally revealed patches of blue. Through it all, Emily kept moving forward. One afternoon she called again. This time she could barely contain her excitement. "I got it." I was standing in my office overlooking Manhattan when the words reached me. "Got what?" I asked, pretending ignorance. "The position." Her voice trembled slightly. "A full-time position." I closed my eyes for a moment. Relief washed through me far stronger than I expected. "Congratulations, Emily." I still cannot believe it. Neither could I, although for different reasons. The job offered stability, benefits, a future. More importantly, it offered something Emily had been fighting to reclaim since the beginning. Independence. Over the next month, other changes followed. She rented a small apartment. Nothing luxurious. Just a clean space with a door that locked and a bed that belonged to her. The suitcase disappeared. The park bench became a memory. Yet despite everything improving, Emily remained exactly who she had always been. She still helped strangers. Still returned lost items. Still stopped to listen when someone needed kindness. Success had not changed her. It had only given her room to breathe again. One evening we walked through the same park where I had first seen her months earlier. The benches sat beneath newly budding trees. The air felt warmer. Life felt different. Emily looked around thoughtfully before smiling. "You know something?" "What?" She glanced toward the path ahead. "For the first time in a long time, I think things are finally going to be okay." Her words should have been simple. Instead, they felt like a victory. Because nobody deserved that sentence more than she did. And as we continued walking beneath the soft glow of the evening lights, I realized helping Emily had never been about changing her life. It had been about giving life a chance to stop standing in her way. The truth has a strange way of finding people when they are finally ready to hear it. Spring arrived quietly in Manhattan. The trees filled with color again. Outdoor cafés reopened. The city seemed lighter somehow. Emily's life had changed just as dramatically. She had settled into her new position and moved into her apartment. For the first time since I met her, stability no longer felt temporary. Watching that transformation brought a satisfaction I could not easily explain. Yet there was one problem. Every opportunity that had appeared in her life carried a secret. And secrets rarely stay hidden forever. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Emily called and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. We chose a small restaurant overlooking the river. The conversation began normally. Work, books, travel plans, the future. Then something changed. Emily grew quieter, more thoughtful. She stared out the window for several seconds before turning back toward me. "Can I ask you something?" she said. The question immediately felt different. "Of course." She reached into her bag and removed a folder. Several documents rested inside. Names, organizations, employment records, business affiliations, pieces of information connected by a pattern that had become impossible to ignore. My pattern. Emily placed the papers on the table carefully. I have been doing some research. I smiled slightly. That sounds dangerous. She did not smile back. The healthcare nonprofit. She pointed toward one document. The administrative group. Then another. The outreach organization. Another. Every opportunity that changed my life somehow connects back to the same network. I remained silent. Emily studied my face. For the first time since meeting her, she was not searching for information. She already knew the answer. She only needed confirmation. You did this, did you not? The restaurant noise faded into the background. For months I had imagined this conversation. None of the versions ended comfortably. I could have denied it. I could have minimized it. Instead, I told the truth. Yes. Emily looked down at the documents. Her expression remained unreadable. How long? Longer than you probably want to hear. A small laugh escaped her despite herself. Then silence returned. Several difficult seconds passed. Finally she spoke. The position. I nodded. The interviews. Another nod. The apartment referral. I nodded again. Emily leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She looked neither angry nor happy. Only overwhelmed. Why? The question sounded genuine. Not accusatory. Simply confused. I searched for the right answer. There were many possible explanations. Most of them incomplete. Because I saw someone fighting harder than anyone else I knew. Emily lowered her eyes. I continued. Because every time life knocked you down, you stood back up. Her expression softened slightly. And because you deserved an opportunity. She stared at me for several moments. You should have told me. You would have refused. Another reluctant smile appeared. That is true. For the first time since the conversation began, the tension eased. Emily looked toward the river outside the window. Sunlight danced across the water. The city moved steadily beyond the glass. Do you know what bothers me most? She asked. What? She laughed softly. I spent months trying to figure out why everything suddenly improved. And Emily shook her head. The answer was sitting across from me drinking coffee the entire time. This time I laughed with her. The sound felt lighter than expected. Eventually the smiles faded. Emily's eyes met mine again. There was gratitude there. Respect. Understanding. Thank you, she said quietly. 3 simple words. Yet they carried the weight of everything neither of us had been able to say before. And in that moment I realized something important. The greatest gift was not that Emily finally knew the truth. It was that the truth had not changed the way she looked at me. Sometimes the smallest place in your life becomes the place you remember forever. Nearly a year had passed since the afternoon Emily learned the truth. Summer had arrived and departed. Autumn had returned to Manhattan once again. The city looked almost exactly the same. Yet everything felt different. Emily's career continued to grow. Her apartment had become a home rather than a temporary stop along the way. Her mother was recovering steadily. The uncertainty that once followed her through every day had finally begun to fade. But the greatest change was harder to measure. It existed in ordinary moments. Shared conversations. Comfortable silences. The simple knowledge that neither of us faced life alone anymore. One cool October evening, Emily called and asked if I could meet her after work. There was something unusual in her voice. Not concern. Not urgency. Something closer to excitement. An hour later, I found her waiting near the entrance of the same park where this story truly began. Golden leaves drifted across the pathways. The air carried the familiar scent of autumn. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Emily simply smiled and motioned for me to follow her. Together we walked deeper into the park. Past the fountain. Past the trees. Past the winding paths that curved beneath the evening sky. Then I saw where she was leading me. The bench. The same bench. Time seemed to slow. A year earlier, I had watched a young woman sleep there beneath a street lamp while holding onto a worn suitcase. Now that woman stood beside me wearing a warm coat and a confident smile. The contrast felt almost impossible to describe. Emily sat down first. I joined her. For several moments we simply looked out across the park. The city lights gradually awakened beyond the trees. People walked past without realizing the significance of that ordinary bench. To them it was just another place to sit. To us it was something else entirely. I come here sometimes, Emily said quietly. I turned toward her. You do. She nodded. Not because I miss those days. Her smile softened. Because I never want to forget them. The answer stayed with me. Emily looked around the park before continuing. When everything was falling apart, I thought my life was ending. She laughed gently. I was wrong. I listened carefully. That bench felt like the lowest point. Her eyes met mine. Now it feels like the place where everything started. The evening breeze moved through the trees above us. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from a nearby street performer. The city continued moving exactly as it always had. Yet for me the world felt strangely still. Emily reached into her bag and removed something small. A photograph. She handed it to me. The image showed the park during autumn. The bench stood beneath golden leaves. On the back she had written a single sentence. I read it slowly. Sometimes life saves you when you least expect it. I looked up. Emily was smiling. Not the uncertain smile of the woman I first noticed. Not the guarded smile of someone trying to survive. This was different. Peaceful. Genuine. Certain. And in that moment, I realized the story had never been about a powerful man helping a struggling woman. It had been about two lonely people finding each other at exactly the right time. The park bench had not changed our lives. A choice had. The choice to notice. The choice to care. The choice to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. As the lights of Manhattan shimmered beyond the trees, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Sometimes the place where you hit bottom becomes the place where your new life begins.